welcome to Pro.NET Community event. And today we are going to talk about pretty interesting topics related to migration of legacy .NET applications written on .NET Framework to a fresh versions. This is pretty hot area because time is passing and more clients come to us with the requests to get their legacy solutions and bring them to the modern technology stack. And one of such stories today will be presented by Mykola Klimenko, solution architect from United States. Mykola, hi, how are you? Ready to present?
Yeah, hello everyone, nice to see you all. I'm glad that we have such a big audience on this presentation. Yes, I'm ready. So can I start it? Or
yeah, absolutely. We can make a start.
Cool. So, as was mentioned, my name is Mykola Klimenko. I'm software architect in EPAM. And today's presentation is a case study about WCF migration to .NET Core. We have performed it on my current project, and I just wanted to share that experience with all of you. A few words about me. I have more than 7 years of development experience in different domain areas like healthcare, manufacturing, retail, etc. Currently, I'm .NET technology lead on one of the projects where we performing project migration to Kubernetes along with tech stack upgrade to .NET Core, and also we support the legacy application. Today's presentation will be divided into the two parts. First, I will tell about the project business goal, how migration to new data centers looks like, just to answer for the questions, why do we migrate .NET Core why we migrate WCF to .NET Core. In the second part, it will be mostly about the common issues and solutions that we faced with and how did we manage to solve them. And we'll cover it with some short summary. If to speak about the project business goal, customer comes to us with need to manage quality and reputation of the product. They want to improve the performance of the overall system and accelerate development life cycles. This was three major business goals for him. And so they decided to go to the new data center. New data center will be Kubernetes cluster. So it will help to increase, and also they wanted to do the technical step upgrade to make the platform with better portability, because current legacy solutions is not portable and is not cross-platform. So a technical step upgrade should increase modifiability and portability of the system. Dockerization will allow auto-scaling, and Kubernetes will make system more mature and resistant. Also, they expected that technical step upgrade will improve performance, and horizontal auto-scaling will allow to improve resource usage. And the last one, very important, it's about the ICDs. They want to see something like blue-green deployment in the future. And based on that, they decided to go to the new data center, which will be on OpenShift cluster, and based on the Linux container, it's using Linux container. Here is a small scratch diagram how the transition stage looks like. This is what we are currently doing. We have existing data center, which we simply call DC3, and we have the new data center, which is DC4. It's just the naming conventions that we use within the project. DC3 is on-premise. It's just a group of on-premise WCF services hosted on the Windows servers. They use typical like MQTT communication. They use SFTP, SMTP, and other infrastructure services. And it is in some internal, and it is under some VPN. New data center is DC4. It is OpenShift cluster. And during the first phase where we are currently at, we migrate only services. We don't migrate the infrastructure. So to set up the connection between the infrastructure like SFTP server, TIPCon, etc., we set up the VPN tunneling between two VPNs. And sometimes it's a big issue. And this is currently where we are. We have successfully migrated probably 70% of .NET applications to .NET Core. They are already in production. And the next part, I will cover some common issues that we faced before we reach out to this point. Let me continue on that. Just a second, I did some message. Oh, okay. I just taking the message that I got in the. This is our new data center, how it looks like. On the left side, this is how our deployment looks like, but I'm not happy how deployed what CI/CD we have, because I mean it wasn't performed by our team. It was performed by the customer DevOps, and there is a lot of subtleties and issues with that. But I will cover a little bit about it, but maybe not so in the details. First of all, they have Stash as a source control. They use Jenkins for CI/CD and JFrog Artifactory for Docker as a Docker registry. Worth to mention here that they don't use Helm. I mean, they use Helm charts, but they have some custom tool to use Helm charts with actually limited all features that Helm charts provide. So we have used some TCM web scale. This is a repository that contains Make framework, which is aimed to cover all the need for CI/CD. So we don't directly work with Helm charts and etc., which makes work very difficult. But I see some. Okay, I will cover all questions and answer in the end if you don't mind. Just want to finish about the DC4. So this is how deployment looks like. We have Stash as a source control, Jenkins for CI/CD, JFrog for Docker images, and etc. And we deploy to 2 OpenShift clusters, and there is some load balancer behind them. This is how it should looks like. Oops. But to get to that point, we have faced with multiple issues. I grouped those issues and just want to, first of all, superficially cover them, and then I will go more in details about them. First, it was Kubernetes experience. Customer DevOps built CI/CD with lack of experience with Kubernetes, which is actually affect us a little bit. Also, technology set was mostly based on the personal experience rather than on some best practices. How did we try to solve that issue? We have created the POC as an example of CI/CD, presented to the customer, show how it could looks like, but they still decided to go with their internal capabilities, with their internal DevOps and etc. Even when at that moment they didn't have CI/CD, which is strange. But I made a note over here that when we create our POC, we have been using some new technologies which customers haven't been working before, because they get used to work with Jenkins, with Stash, and etc. So when we create our POC, we use different tech stack, which probably maybe was one of the reasons why they decided to go with their internal DevOps efforts. So made a note that if you just want to show some conceptual how to do it, it's better to use the same stack of technologies that is well known by the customer for better communication. Second issue is about the portability of the platform. It's actually a big deal, because we decided to go to the new data center, which is OpenShift cluster with Linux containers, but we have, I mean, our legacy platform is not cross-platform. I mean, our legacy applications are not cross-platforms. First of all, we have WCF services or .NET framework. We have very complicated logic for handling secrets and configuration, because it's based on the file system of the servers, which is also quite a challengeable task for Kubernetes. Third one is networking issue, because the new data center has its own network, and it's hard to set up the connection between two data centers sometimes, and sometimes it's quite a lot of bureaucracy process, so it also was an issue. SQL Server integrated security on Kubernetes. On the new data center, we don't have set it up integrated security for connection to the SQL because it requires some Active Directory, it requires some setup, so we didn't have it, at least for now. SFTP connection. It was quite unexpected issue. I mean, we didn't encounter that, but when we started to migrate service that use SFTP connection to new data center, we faced it with issues. It's required to be mounted, but mount command required to be run by root user, which is security concern. And we don't have only WCF servers, we also have web forms applications, and we also have Windows Forms application. Not Windows Forms, we have also Windows services. So it was also required to be migrated to some cross-platform, which also requires some dev efforts. And back to compatibilities with DC3. Even after we migrate the service to the DC4, we also need to, the service also needs to work on the DC3. So during some transition stage where we currently are, when we migrate only applications to the new data center, but all the infrastructure is still in DC3, and there is no sunset for DC3. We should to keep alive both sides, DC3 and DC4, and which makes some testability and maintainability problems. How did we solve all of those issues? For VCF services, we migrated them to .NET Core with SWAP Core library. For secrets management, we use Kubernetes secrets along with some health chart infrastructure. I will tell more about that in the further slides. For networking issue, it's just common approach. We set up VPN tunneling between different VPNs. It's not but it's still an issue because sometimes it is. About the web form application, we migrated to the Blazor as Microsoft suggests, according to their documentation, and it was the right decision. I will also mention it in the further slides. For the backward compatibilities with DC3, we also have some internal libraries, a lot of internal libraries. And the one per step before starting the migration of the VCF services, that we have migrated all of those internal libraries to .NET Standard with support of .NET 4.0, because .NET 4.0 services cannot work with .NET Standard. So we have to comply with all .NET framework platforms like .NET 4.0, .NET 4.5, and .NET Standard. So all of our libraries become multi-framework support. For the mounting issue with SFTP connection, as long as root user is not acceptable solution for us because security consideration, we set up seccomp profile, which is actually possibility to run root user, but with very limited access. And that decision was accepted by the security team. So we have a root user, but it's privileged container, but it has very limited access. Only those that needed to run SFTP, to mount command. And the last block about the issue is testing and maintainability. Support two data center. One is Windows services, another one is Kubernetes. It's hard, and it also brings a lot of testability and maintainability issues, traceability. Sometimes when QA find the issues. They also need to identify why that issue has happened. Is it platform related or is it application related, and etc. And it's also caused a huge regression because we migrate Net Framework WCF to Net Core swap, which is actually a big deal. So to decrease a little bit the regression and improve the quality, we did additional first step. We firstly, after we approved the POC for migration VCF service to .NET Core along with SOAP, based on the SOAP Core library, we also integrated SonarQube into legacy data center just to measure quality of the services that we have, services and libraries that we have. Check it what unit test coverage do we have, what maintainability index, and etc. We measure all of those parameters. All quality attributes that SonarQube provides, and based on that, we also improve some libraries and services because there was a huge gap for some of them. Some of them didn't have unit testing or some, or etc. Or just coverage was very low. This is overall what did we face it. Now let's go more in details about VCF migration issues. So despite of the fact that we have to migrate VCF Net Framework to .NET Core, we also have to support the current existing infrastructure. An issue over here is that our legacy VCF services support HTTP and MQTT. MQTT is using TIBCO, and we had some internal libraries that set up the communication with TIBCO. And the new services should work with that also, which is obviously. And there is some custom configurations in web config that should be supported. So we have to comply with legacy system, and for all other services, our new service should work the same. They even cannot consider that it's a new one. We have found two ways how to migrate the service to how to migrate VCF service to .NET Core. One library is SWAP Core, and another alternative was Core VCF. SWAP Core is lightweight library. It's just simple serialization, deserialization, XML message over HTTP. It has features of VSDL generation. It has some features from VCF Net Framework, but in the end, it's not a replacement of the VCF. It's just a lightweight library as an alternative for VCF. And it's integrated like a middleware into your ASP.NET Core application. While Core VCF, it's the big one. It's supported by the Microsoft, and it's actually migration the entire ecosystem of VCF that we had in Net Framework into .NET Core world. But at the moment when we start to work on the POC, Core VCF was way more, it has not so mature functionality that we need. We created two POC, compare both of them, investigate the potential issues, and so Core looks better for us. It looks more mature at that moment. I'm not sure about what's the current situation with Core VCF right now. This is interesting issue. It's also about the VCF migration. We had some internal library that is aimed to hold all service references, service references within the application. It's just simple package that contains service reference. That's it. But the issue is, after we migrated that package into the .NET standard, we cannot support the same dev experience for managing service references because it was deprecated by the Microsoft. And the suggested approach is to use connected services as Microsoft, it's from the Microsoft documentation, but it wasn't accepted by them, by other teams who is working on .NET Framework applications. Another one was to use some internal tools and somehow integrate it into the IDE but it was also unaccepted by them. And the main requirement was that we need to have the package on .NET Standard with a new CS project format, but service reference management should keep the same. The process for the service reference management should keep the same. And what we did, we added simple CS project file, which is the same as it was on .NET Framework. Reference the CS project file to the same directory, and we created a project to the .NET Standard. We added the two CS project file into the project, but both of them work with the same directory. So when you open in the Visual Studio or Rider or anything else that package and need to perform any changes, you will open it like in two modes. One is the .NET Framework, and which contains only service references, and the second one is .NET Standard. So you have the same user experience for managing service references, and when you apply, update, edit, or delete any service references, those changes will be automatically applied to the package, to the .NET Standard package. This is how we solve it. But it was a strange requirement. Second issue, as I mentioned, our WCF service should be backward compatible with some features of service model. Maybe it's wrong statement over here. It should be backward compatible with existing ecosystem. Because for the end users, our service should remain the same. All service references that we had before, all swap UI service references or all create test cases should work as it was before. From their perspective, they don't need to know that service was updated. And we also need to support MQTT and HTTP for our WCF service. And our new WCF service on .NET Core, it contains two hosts. One is aimed to handle HTTP, and another is aimed to handle MQTT. MQTT is just the same WCF service host, but with additional middleware. And in that middleware, we put the logic for TIBCO handling. Under the hood, it's just to stop connection to the TIBCO, subscribe some listeners, and transfer the message to the appropriate WCF service handler. And there was some not supported feature because existed library for handling TIBCO communication in .NET Framework was poorly based on the WCF capabilities. It was based on some service model primitives that are not supported by .NET Core. And that was a big deal. So we had to add some additional logic. We had to handle something we had to write something from scratch to handle that just to comply with existing functionality. Fortunately, Swap Core provide, for example, some replacement for iDispatch message inspector, iOperation worker. They have iMessage inspector 2 and iFault exception transformer. They also have some replacement for iOperation worker, but there is some issue, and it's a well-known issue. As the library said, on the fault exceptions, it doesn't work as expected. So this is all worth to mention issues with WCF migration. Second block of issue is .NET Core migration. As I mentioned, all our internal packages should has multiple framework support. So in the end, our CS project for the libraries looks like this, where we reference .NET Standard, .NET 4.0, .NET 4.5. Also, sometimes we need to handle some specific libraries for the target framework. And there is some rare cases when we need to add some macros in the code and writes a block of code for specific framework. Another issue, quite of interesting, when we do the migration, we try to have a small regression area. We try to not change anything that we don't need in scope of migration. And our legacy systems have been using Log4net directly without Microsoft extensions. There wasn't any dependency injection, so they had a poor modifiability and maintainability. But we tried not to change and accept the dependency injection because we needed it to add more unit tests and etc. And when we migrated the service to a Linux container, when it started running on Linux container, we observed in the Splunk that method name, class name, and line of the code is missed. We contacted Microsoft support about that just to investigate what it could be, because it works fine on DC3 on the legacy data center, but there is some issue exactly on the Linux container. After 3 days communication with them, they replied that it's something with Log4net. They are not handling that case, and they didn't provide any suggestions. And we just try to replace direct usage of Log4net with Microsoft extension logging and add Log4net as a provider. Just want to try, maybe it will help, and it did. So after that, we also include migration logging approach from direct usage of Log4net into the Microsoft extension logging, just to avoid those question marks issues. And it is in scope of the migration of the service. Also, some issues about the .NET Core migrations is web forms and Windows services. So we migrated web forms to the Blazor. It was the right decision because Blazor allowed to reuse business logic that we had on the UI. Also, web forms and Blazors have similar development paradigm. It uses the same concept. If don't think about how the connection between UI and backend is set, it's pretty similar. One note that we cannot reuse the web forms component, but to rewrite them into the Blazor component, it's not so difficult. It's approximately 1 or 2 hours work. Maybe we just don't have some mature components. For the Windows service migration, we use background services, and the migration was pretty straightforward. We didn't notice anything special that was to mention right now. And background services are cross-platform, so we are running them on Linux containers and on the Windows service in legacy data center. About the migration development efforts. So as I mentioned, during the migration, we perform multiple things. First, we migrate the project into the new project format. We replace some third-party libraries that are not compatible with .NET Core. Also, we add dependency injections because we need it in scope of testability. We also add some extra unit tests and etc. because we need to improve our quality gates. And we made an investigation just to find out maybe there is any tools that will help us to make our migration process faster. We find one of them, it's TryConvert. It's suggested by the Microsoft. We try it, and it covered 2 points. It covered project migration to the new format and third-party libraries dependencies handling. So it's automatically handle all spine brain activities that we had. And it's reduced our dev efforts for the migration for 1 or 3 days. Depends on the scope of the project, of the service. About the performance measurement, it's a very interesting one. we 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 don't have. I mean, we have some benchmark environment with performance tests, but those performance tests are mostly it's performance test for some business flow, which includes a lot of service collaboration. So it's hard to identify where is some performance bottleneck or did we improve the performance or not. And they are not applicable to component performance testing, which we need. We didn't have any strict constraint about that as long as we don't have component performance testing. But we, by our initiative, because we have been interesting, is it faster or slower, just to understand. We created some Splunk query to test the performance. It's not ideal way how to do it. Oh, sorry, sorry. And what I can say is that performance wasn't degraded. It's probably the same or better. I mean, it looks better, but I cannot say for sure that swap core WCF on .NET Core is way better than other legacy WCF on WCF.NET framework, because I don't have a proof for that. But on the first look, it is faster. And the last block of issue is Kubernetes issues. As I mentioned, we had very difficult common configurations handling on legacy data centers. Legacy data centers has some global configs, and those global configs was taken from the stash repository, common configurations, and deployed to the server as a file and use it as a file system. So all global configs have been based on file system over there, which is not workable approach for DC4. But we have to make some approach that will be backward compatible with DC3 and DC4. So we containerized that stash repository, which is actually just a group of global configurations files. And we use that image from common configs as an init container. And when we start our application container during the deployment on Kubernetes, it starts the init container, which populate the config volume. It is shared volume with application container. And that shared volume later is used by service container, by application container. And along that process, we also inject some Kubernetes secrets. So this approach works with both. I mean, in stash repository, we just simply add the Docker file for our global configurations and added appropriate pipeline for that, appropriate step for pipelines to create the Docker image with latest changes in common configuration. Also integrated security. I believe that there is a case how to set up integrated security on Linux on OpenShift cluster Linux container to have a connection to MS SQL server. But we were not lucky with it. I mean, not we, but we asked DevOps to do it. They said it's impossible. And after that, we decided to go with different authentication flow. So now we're using SQL Server authentication in our new data center, but legacy data center still use integrated security. Just to be on the safe side, we encrypted all secrets that we are using in such SQL Server authentication approach. And the last one is version chaos, because we are currently on transition stage. So it means that all our infrastructure is in legacy data center, and we have running application in new and old data center. And we have to maintain them both. But they are on different VPNs. They are using different package sources. They are using different Jenkins. And there is different DevOps who handles those two data centers. There is different QAs who handles those two data centers, which makes things very difficult. And there is no silver bullet right now how to solve that issue. But we are becoming better. We already made some changes in our pipelines just to set up some webhooks. When DC3 pipeline started to run, it automatically kick off the build in DC4. We also fixed it. We also set up the connection to have some single source for our NuGet packages, because it was it was a big deal, because we DC4 pipelines doesn't have pipelines for .NET libraries yet, and we set up some workaround to promote the packages from DC3 NuGet server to JFrog Artifactory in DC4. And that's it about the Kubernetes issues. And now let's go to some summary, and after that I will go through the questions that you have. So WCF in .NET Core, it's something unnatural. It's something that shouldn't exist. There is huge difference between those two technologies. Huge difference in age between those two technologies. And I'm pretty sure that WCF didn't expect that someone it will be deployed to .NET Core. It was based on the .NET Core. But sometimes it could be beneficial. In our case, it was, because what is the alternative for that? To migrate it to some new technologies, but how to do it when all of your infrastructure is based on WCF, all of your services is based on WCF, how to make it slowly and with a low regression, I have no idea. And also we need an approach for communication between those services should remain the same, which makes things very difficult. But with migration, old technology to the new one, we didn't spend a lot of dev efforts for migration. After we created the POC, proved that it will work as it is, set up everything, migration for one service, it took for us probably a week or two just to migrate WCF.NET Framework to WCF.NET Core. About CI/CD, I will complain about that a lot, because our current CI/CD is immature, and when you have Kubernetes with immature pipelines, there is no point for Kubernetes. This issue is because current our CI/CD is a product owned by DevOps. They just present it to us, they ask us to use it, but it's very poor. It's even worse than we had in our legacy data centers, and currently they are redoing it. So I hope the next one will be better. Also, supporting old and new platforms should be as short as possible. We are, as I mentioned multiple times, we're in transition stage when we support those two data centers. But as much services we migrated, it's become harder and harder to maintain all of them. And if something is happened, we need to understand, is it platform related, is it application related, how to fix it, how to create the fix that will work on both data center if it's some platform related. So it's better to make the transition stage as short as possible, just to force yourself to migrate everything to the new data set as long as you decided to go. And the last one, just do not afraid to invest time into the POC, because we suggested to create the POC. We proved that we can create WCF to .NET Core. We presented to the customer, they liked it, and we evaluate how much dev efforts it will cost. We'll evaluate all other alternative decisions, and they prove it. And now we have quite an interesting task, I would say. And that's it. That's it that I have. Now let's go to your questions that I see over here.
Yeah, I can help you with the questions, Mikola, no worries. There are plenty of them. The first one is from Alexander. Do you have any positive experience on using tools for FW to .NET migrations? I think it was about framework to the .NET framework to .NET, which is a recent version of .NET migration. So you mentioned the try migrate tool, try convert tool, right? So, and it seems like you've got some positive experience.
Yeah, about the try convert, as I mentioned, it's reduce our dev efforts for 1 day, approximately 1 day, to be honest. There, what I can add to that, try convert is pretty mature. I would definitely say that, because it handles third-party libraries. You don't need to investigate how to replace the libraries. Somehow it's handled. Even, for example, we had some issue with SFTP client. We have used some legacy library like Tamir, SSH something, I don't remember. And try convert, replace it with appropriate one, and also replace the block of code that was needed for that. So pretty mature.
Okay. Another one. Did you do a comparison of performance tests before and after the upgrade? I think you've already described that. But if you want to add anything else,
it's actually interesting one. I really want to measure the performance, because I'm wondering about that, how performance become better or not, just to understand how good is .NET Core, how good is SWAP Core. But unfortunately, we have the ticket in the backlog to create some mature component performance testing, but I cannot answer, how it will be better based on the gRPC or RPC. And actually, we cannot use gRPC, I believe. I'm not sure that how we will integrate with the other services if we will change the protocol, because our new service should work as expected for all our services, which is on .NET framework. How to safely migrate one service without any effects on other services with changing to gRPC. I'm not sure. I hope I answered for your question. Sorry.
Okay. Sorry, Mikola, you started answering the next one about pros of SOAP core over gRPC, or
yeah,
not?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe wasn't my best answers.
I think you described it why you decided to use SOAP core, not because it's better than gRPC. I think if you had a choice and if you started working on a greenfield solution, it's unlikely that you would stick to SOAP core in that case. So you had to use SOAP core because you wanted to make the migration as smooth as it's possible. I think that was the main justification. So probably you would stick to gRPC because it's modern, it's fresh, and it should be faster. Well, according to
RPC is a different protocol.
It's different.
And we cannot use it because all other services. We somehow need to integrate all other services with that. That we can communicate with that one without some effect on other platforms which are not migrated yet. So it's
okay. So let's move to another one. What was the quality of initial code base? Did they use DI, popular mappers, and so on?
Quality was poor. Definitely was poor. We expected that when we integrated Sonar to legacy pipelines, and average coverage for the platform was 10 or 20%. modifiability index was very low. There was a lot of security issues also identified by the sonar. And there wasn't any dependency injection. Some of the services have been using a Spring Core boot, something like that. I mean, I even doesn't know that we have Spring Core dependency injection in the .NET framework, because Spring is something Java related. But there was some dependency injection provided.
Very legacy one.
Yeah.
There was an attempt to port Spring to .NET.
Yeah, and it was horrible because it even doesn't provide any good documentation for .NET. So I just read the Java documentation for that and try to understand what is the issue with it. We replaced it totally. We replaced it, and in the place where we don't have any dependency injection, we added it. But I mean, a lot of code has been using static classes. So funny notes over here that after, for example, we have class A, which use some static classes infrastructure, and we change that static classes to dependency injection. Now it's a singleton, which is injected into that class A. We didn't change the field. So, I mean, we still use Pascal case for that service, for that injected class. Because otherwise we will have more changes, and we just want to keep our pull request solid. I mean, with just for the reviewer, it will be easier to follow it. But if we will start to rename the fields, properties, it will cause additional. It wouldn't cause any additional regression error, but it will be harder to review it. So we didn't rename it during the migration. We just perform the migration, keep the fields as it is. If there was some static class usage, we just use the field with capital case. And after the migration, we create the additional request aimed to change the naming convention.
Okay. Good. So the next one, probably pretty quick. Did they had distributed transactions over WCF? Oh, but by the way, there was another question, but probably it was more a comment that not VCF but WCF. Yeah, I think you know that it's WCF, but I also quite often pronounce it as VCF.
Yeah.
WCF. Yeah. Okay. Distributed transactions.
Yeah. I mean, they have transaction ID, and it's all the communication between services are performed by the TIPCO. And that TIPCO is handling that letter queue also. So in case something was broken, it put it to the dead letter queue and try to identify what was changed, and etc. They use there is one-way and two-way binding. Two-way is when they meet when they change the status, but they also market the entity as it's in progress. Some choreography patterns, I don't know how it calls.
So it's not a kind of native WCF transactions.
No,
it's something custom built.
It's custom, basically custom.
Okay. Another one. Well, I think you answered. Not a native WCF transactions, because WCF actually supported distributed transactions, like on its as a part of its core functionality.
Yeah, I know. And for example,
and it was a Windows-based technology. It was, I think, the question was asked because the author wanted to understand. Did you have any issues with this distributed transactions migrations?
Not yet identified.
I think they were like 100% Windows technology.
And what I can say is that their internal libraries that handle TIPCO communication was based on, there was custom service host factory, there was custom custom channel based on the service model primitives. They just create the custom classes for the channel, for operation working, etc., to work with MQTT protocol over there. But those primitives hasn't been supported by .NET Core, so we have to create something from scratch.
Mm-hmm. All right. So the next one, I think it's related to the situation when you shared your approach about getting the access to secrets. Why not to mount directory with files to containers, use SMB share, for example?
I'm not aware about the SMB share. We mounted it. We mount command to container volume. But not, I mean, I don't know what is SMB.
Yeah, I think it's one of the ways how you can attach shared volumes to your.
Sorry, I can't answer because I mean, I'm afraid that I will say some nonsense. So sorry for that.
Okay, no problem. The next question, well, there are a couple similar questions related to the size and time. So what was the size of the whole project? What was the size of your team, and how many days did it take for you to migrate?
It's a good question, actually. We have approximately 20 .NET Framework WCF services. 5 of them are heavy loaded services. I mean, there was more than millions of transactions per, I don't know, per minute or more. It's a lot of transactions for some of them. Some of them are key services because all ecosystem is dependent on them. Our team size was 3 people. Now there are 2 people. And usually one person is take responsibility for specific service. He or she just start migration, start dev testing. Actually, worth to mention what tickets do we have. So we have tickets for init migration from .NET Framework to .NET Core. Then we have, in scope of that, we perform dependency injection. We migrate the service from .NET Core to from .NET Framework to .NET Core to Swap Core, and etc. We also perform the dev testing and deploy it to the dev environment where we perform the dev testing. Second ticket is testing service on key environment. It is also includes some bug fixing and some QA support. Also, there is a ticket for release the service. So you have to, it's just a placeholder to keep on track that this service is going to be released during this sprint. So you just to make sure that everything is settled down, everything was tested, and etc. Also, we have a separate ticket for logger, because after migration, we also migrate the old logger approach with using Clockrunner directly to Microsoft extension logging, just to avoid those question marks on our Linux containers. And we have a separate ticket for DC4 migration, because firstly, we migrate service to DC3, and we promote it to the production. It works on the production for 1 sprint, and in the another sprint, we also deploy the service to new data centers. So we just have 2 weeks time break before service will be promoted to production after it was to the new data center production after it was deployed to the legacy data center. So firstly, we migrate the service, deploy it to the old data centers, then after 2 weeks, we deploy it to the new data centers. Just because otherwise we will have such issue. I mean, what if we will have some platform related issues if we will do it in one shot when we deploy it to DC3 and DC4. So just to avoid such infrastructure issues, we decided to split them into two parts. And how much time migration to all data center is approximately 2 or 3 weeks, and migration to the new data center is also 2 or 3 weeks. But usually
for one service, right? For one service.
So usually 1 month for one service, just to migrate it to .NET Core and also to Kubernetes.
Okay, so then 3 people were able to migrate this in less than a year, if I calculate this correctly. Okay,
it's correct.
reasonable.
It's actually our estimate. So after this year, we have to migrate all the .NET framework services to .NET Core.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we have a couple more minutes. Let's try to answer quickly. Did you think of change the architecture from client-server to message-based system? Well, I think you explained that it was like a migration as is without any attempt to re-architect, right? So I think you probably would consider if it was a greenfield solution, different flavors, but here you didn't consider this as an option.
Oh, sorry, I just was disturbed a little bit.
Okay.
Yes.
So the question was about. So you have a client server architecture, and did you consider the migration to message-based system? You have this Tipka, I think it's a message broker. Well, you have a mix. It's not pure client server, and also you probably tried just to migrate as is without any significant re-architecturing, right?
It is a mix. It's actually like message-based system with a mix.
Okay. Did you have any legacy tech like tech dependencies like COM or COM Plus or maybe third-party native DLLs?
Fortunately, didn't find any yet, but I believe there is. I just have some list of services there that I don't want to migrate, but I would have to.
Well, there was an example about integrated security for SQL. That's something where you had to switch to another authentication method. Right? That's an example, but it wasn't about DLLs or so. It's just Windows specific thing. Okay, another one. Some people recommend not to mix Kubernetes cloud and .NET migration and do it one by one. What was your point? What's your point of view? Again, really quickly, we are almost out of time.
Oh, I missed the question. So
the question was about. So you did like it sounded like you had 2 simultaneous migrations. One is from data center to Kubernetes and another from legacy.NET to a new .NET. And there is a recommendation not to mix, not to try to do this.
But I believe I already answered it in previous questions that we split the migration. Firstly, we migrate the service to .NET Core, check that everything works fine, promote it to the production, and if there is any complaints from production support, from the support, we start migration to Kubernetes. So we don't do it in parallel. We just do step by step.
Okay. And the last one, what about risk of adoption third-party library like SOAP Core? Well, I mean, from my perspective, it's the same risk when you add any NuGet package to your solution. It's the same risk. You should, of course, measure the potential risks. You should see how this library is maintained, what's the license, and so on.
Actually, the risk with any open source library that you use. I mean, you can be sure about that. And software doesn't provide any support. We contacted them, but it's just, it's a free community. So there is no some specific enterprise who controls that. About the core WCF, I know that Microsoft invests some time and maybe money into that, but I'm not aware. And as I mentioned, at the moment when we start to do some POC, it was not so mature as core because it's complete. We can compare SOAP Core and Core WCF. It's completely different things, as I mentioned on the beginning.
Okay. Yeah. I can say this. I can share the same experience. A couple of years ago, we had one migration of WCF service, and at the moment, SOAP Core was more mature comparing to what what was the state of core WCF.
Yeah, I
Okay,
don't know what the
okay.
situation is WCF right now.
Same. Okay, actually that's it. No more new questions. Mykola, thank you so much for your nice story, for sharing your experience, your opinion, and thanks everyone who attended the session. Please feel free to share the feedback regarding this event and rate our speaker. Please put him 5 stars. I think he deserves that. And yeah, thank you so much and have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks.